Hi, this is Simon Upstill and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion. And today, as winter is drawing in, I thought we could look at this scene of snow falling onto this graphic object. Now, the trick here is to how we get that snow to actually land where we want it. And I hope this is going to be interesting. Quite a few interesting tricks that are involved in this process. So let's get started. Okay, so first of all, let's check out our project settings. I've got 1920 1080 for 24 frames a second, and I'm choosing a duration of 18 seconds. So now let's import some assets. I'm going to import snowy background and rocks. So select both of those and import. You'll notice that the rocks layer has an alpha channel, so it sits in front of that snowy background. And I'm going to call this group background, and I'm going to make a new group, and I'm going to call this one text. So into that text group, I'm going to import that text texture, and we can turn that off. And now in this same group, I'm going to make a text object. So grab the text tool, and let's type the word snow, and let's increase its size to say 500. Let's set center alignment, come to properties. Let's reset its position, make sure it's absolutely in the center. Now, I urge you, don't use the position here to set the text position. Use the baseline. So let's bring it down. Let's come down to, say, 120. The point of that is that when we're using this for various other operations, it's going to keep this position, whereas if we used the transform position, it wouldn't. So it's important to use the baseline position for that. Next, what we're going to do is come over to Appearance and Face. And instead of color, we're going to select Texture. And we're going to grab that text texture and drag it into the source well, like so. And what I might do is I might just slightly offset this. So I don't want it to be quite like that. I want it something like that. I want to see these cracks nicely positioned in relation to my text, and I think that's quite good. So -70 there. Obviously, it depends on what kind of font and text you're using, how this is going to work out. So then what we're going to do is we're going to make a clone of this text layer. So right-click, make clone layer, and we'll turn off the original. So what we're going to do is we're going to make another new group here to put that clone into. So make a new group, object new group, and drag the clone into that. And I'm going to call this main. So I'm going to take the clone layer and I'm going to come to filters and I'm going to grab keying Luma keyer. And what I want to do is I want to create some transparency here. And I'm just going to drag the controls in a bit like this till we get something like that. So roughly that. Then to my main group, I'm going to add filters, stylize, extrude. I'm going to have an extrude angle of 270 and a distance of 15. And then I just want to come down. I think the front brightness I'm going to set to 0.4. and the back brightness to 0.1. So you see now we've got this sort of eaten away text, which is going to be quite useful for us. Because what I want to do is I want the snow to land in these sort of crevices here. We need to do a little bit more work on this. First of all, though, we're going to add color levels, and we're just going to bring in the black and the white like that. And then we're just going to bring down the white till we get something like the white out there, till we come to get something like this. Next, I want to make another clone of my original text layer. So right-click, make clone layer. And again, let's make a new group to sit this in. So put that in there. And then I'm going to call this dark extrude, for want of a better name. And to this group, I'm going to add, again, the extrude filter. So stylize, extrude. Again, we want an angle of 270 and a distance, this time of 15. And let's have front brightness. So those other values are okay, I think. And what we want to do is the extrude style, we want to switch to gradient. And let's open up that gradient. We only actually want one color. So I'm going to click on, to pull the other color away so it disappears. And then I just want a kind of nice dark gray, something like that. Maybe that's a little bit too dark. Let's click on that swatch, just brighten it up a little bit. Something like that is going to work, I think. Next, I want to make some icy edges that we can bring up that look like they're getting frosted over as the snow falls. So yet again, I'm going to clone that original text layer. So right-click, make clone layer. The reason I'm using clones here is because we could ultimately come in and adjust that text and everything else would update. So that's why I'm using clones. So again, let's make a new group to put that clone in, drop that in there. So I've called that group Icy Edge, and let's add some filters to it. First of all, I want to add filters keying Lumakeer, and we can just leave that at the defaults. Then what I want to do is add an extrude, so stylize extrude. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to set the angle to 90, the distance to 5, and then the front brightness to 1, back brightness to 1. Shading is going to be gradient, and we just want white here, so I'm going to remove the black. And you can see what that's given us is this nice sort of bright upper edge, but it's much too clean. So what we're going to do is we're going to add filters, stylize, crystallize. Now this is an animating effect, so we want to set the speed to 0. That size of 8 is going to do just fine. So as you can see, we've now got the appearance of some snow having already fallen on this. So what I'm going to do is actually going to duplicate this group. So right click, duplicate, and I'm going to call this Icy Edge large. And the change that I'm going to make here is to come to the crystallize, and let's double that value. So let's go for 16. So we have a larger size there. But I also want to now blur that. So I'm going to add blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to set that Gaussian blur to 16 just to take the edge off that so it's not so sharp. So those two together are working pretty well. What I think I want to do here, though, with this group is to set its blend mode to add, just so it kind of gives us a little bit more. So what we're going to do over the course of the animation is to bring these on. So for the time being, I'm going to just turn those off so they don't confuse the rest of our operation, but just we need to remember that they're there. So now let's come on to the bit that this tutorial is all about, and that's how we create this effect of the snow coming down and landing in very specific places on our object. So I want it to be landing on the top of the letter, well, the top surfaces of the letters, and in these cracks here that I've made. So to do that, we are going to come back to our text object and we are going to make another clone. And again, I want to make a new group to put that clone in, and I'm going to call this edge. Put that in capitals just so we know what it is. So we don't actually need to see this, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it out to the top here just so we can get a feel for it as we're working, and I'm going to turn off that text layer. So I've called that clone main, and we also want a clone of the version of the text that's Luma keyed. So inside that main group, do you remember we had a clone? And what we're going to do is we're going to copy that. So copy, and we're going to paste it into our edge group. And we're going to call this clone cracks because that's what we're going to aim for with that. So let's select the clone main, and we're going to come to stylize fill, and we're going to select a fill color of black. Then we are going to turn it off just so we can have a look at the Lumakeer. And what we want to do with this is we want to pretty much isolate just the cracks. So it means bringing it all the way down to there. And what we're going to do is going to invert it. So you'll see we now just have the cracks pretty much. And what we're going to do is we're going to fill this now with white. So select that layer, stylize, fill, and we're going to make that white. And now when we see the two of them together, you can see we've got black for the text and white for the cracks. Then what we're going to do is we're going to select the master group, so the edge group itself, and we're going to add a couple of filters. So first of all, we're going to add stylize extrude, and 90 degrees for the angle, 10 degrees for the distance, front brightness of 1, back brightness of 1, extrude style gradient. Again, we don't want black, we want white. So what we've now got is a map of where we want our snow to fall. So we want it to fall in the cracks, so that's why they're white, and we want it to fall on the tops of the letters, so that's why we've got this white extrusion, and we've got black where we don't want it to fall. Now there's one other thing we need to do here, and that is to turn this into alpha information rather than just black and white information. And the simplest way of doing that is to come to Filters, Color, Channel Mixer, and come down here to the alpha output, set the alpha to 0, and then just select one of these channels, doesn't really matter which, and set that to 1. And now the luminance is providing the alpha, and so we've got exactly what we need. Okay, so now let's have some fun with this. I'm going to turn this off, and let's turn back on our main text group. So we need to find a way of getting the snow to hit those target areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another new group, and I'm going to come over to the library. I'm going to come down to content. Where are we? Content there. Type in the search bar the word blur, and you'll see we've got a number of different blurs there. I'm going to grab the one called blur 11 and bring it into this new group. So I've called that group Settling Flakes, and I've got my blur element there. And what I want to do is I want to turn it into snow. So you might think the obvious thing to do is to use an emitter, but that's not going to allow us to get these flakes to land. So here's the secret. What we're going to do is we're going to come to Object, Replicate, rather than Make Particles. So select Replicate. Let's come to the inspector, and let's set the shape to Image, and we'll use that edge group that we made as the source. And then we'll set the arrangement to Random Fill. And let's set the number of points to 500. I also want to set the blend mode of this group to Screen. And let's come back to the replicator. So let's have a scale of 20 and a scale randomness of 10. Now you'll notice it's sort of working, but it's not out of register with our text. And that's because we need to do one thing here with our edge group, and that's to turn it to fixed resolution. And when we do that and refresh the timeline, you can see that those are sort of sitting more or less where they are meant to sit. Now, let's discuss the control called emission alpha. And you'll see that if I set that to 0, the alpha is completely ignored. But as I increase it, it's more and more specifically targeting the areas that I've picked with my edge mat. So I'm going to go for a value of 95 because I want it to be pretty specific. So now let's talk about the all-important question of how we're going to get these flakes, which are landing in the right place, which are sitting in the right place, I should say, to come in and land in the right place. And to do that, we're going to use Behaviors, Replicator, Sequence Replicator. And we're going to add parameter behavior position. We're going to have it come in slightly from the left, so it's slanting in rather than falling straight down. So I'm going to have negative 150, and 700 on X. Now, the reason for that is the middle of the screen is 540, but I've just added a bit of extra so it gets down to the bottom of our text, or rather it doesn't, it clears the top of the screen, rather, I should say. So I'm going to set the sequencing to from and the spread to 50. And now, if we come back to our beginning of our timeline and press play, you'll see that the flakes come and they land in our designated areas. So what we can do is we can come to our replicator, and if we don't like where the flakes are landing, we can just click on the replicate seed button until they land where we do want them. So I quite like the way that's landing there on the O's, for example, top of the O. So I'm going to stick with that. And then in order just to build up this effect, we can duplicate this, and each time we're going to click on the replicate seed to change the position of the flakes. So let's right-click duplicate and then hit replicate seed, and you see we've got more. Actually, one other thing I want to do here is I want to increase the angle randomness. So I'm going to go for 360. Remember to do that on the first one as well, because we don't want the flakes to be too obviously the same particle element. And so we can duplicate again. And again, we can just click on that random seed. And each time, we can just keep building this up. So I'm going to do this, I don't know, probably a dozen times. Again, each time clicking on the random seed. And you could, for example, have some smaller flakes if you wanted. They don't all have to be that same size. Really just sort of giving you the overall idea. You can finesse this as you choose, really. So I'm going to just probably do a little bit more of that. So now I've got about a dozen of these, and they look like this. And they're all landing pretty much exactly where I'd like them to land. What I might do, though, is you see we're now at 12 seconds, but I want them to keep going towards the end. So what I'm going to do is select some of these later ones and just slide them along on the timeline so they land later. We've got some landing much later down like that. Maybe even bring that even later still, just so they're not all landing at the same time. So once the snow is gone. And what I might also do is with that very first one, we wanted to do something different with this. If we want to get that to land a little bit sooner, I'm going to take that sequence replicator rather than the replicator itself and move the sequence replicator back. So I'm going to move it so that first flake is just breaking the frame right at the head of the animation. So just while I'm working on this tutorial, I'm going to turn a few of these off because they're starting to tax my system just a little bit while I'm screen recording as well. But normally you should be able to get pretty good results using this. Yeah, so that's going a little bit smoother. So now I want to have a look at, do you remember we made these nice icy edges? See how that works if we bring those on. So I'm going to come to 4 seconds on the timeline. And with them both selected, I'm going to come to Properties, and I'm going to hit an opacity keyframe, set that to 0, come forward to 8 seconds on the timeline, and set those both back up to 100. Although what I might do with that large one, select that on its own, just set that maybe just down to around 75 or even perhaps 50, just so it's not too obvious. Yes, I think that's probably going to be better. So altogether, that's looking like this. And when the snow is falling in front of it, you'll get much more of a sense of that sort of building up. So let's just quickly look at creating some snow. I'm going to turn off the settling flakes for the time being. I'm going to just grab the blur element there and copy that And let's make a new group. Let's paste that into that group there. And this time around, I am going to be making an emitter. So let's select the blur. Let's make particles. I'm going to set the blend mode of this group to screen. And then let's come over to the emitter and set it all up. The shape is going to be line. So I want a line running across the top of the screen that shoots them downwards. So I'm going to have an X start point of negative 1200, a Y start point of 600, X end point of 1200, Y end point of 600. Let us also change the emission angle to 15 because we want that sort of slanting effect. But the emission range we want to set to 0 because we just want them all to come down in the same direction. Let's increase the life to 20. First of all, I just want to come down and reset our our scale rather. Let's set the scale to 10, scale randomness to 10, just so it's all a little bit more comprehensible. So let's have a look at the birth rate. Let's come to the first frame and let's set a keyframe of 0. I want to come forward to 7 seconds on the timeline. Let's set that up to 400 and then come forward to 11 seconds on the timeline. Oops, 11 seconds. And set that back down to 0. And so now we've got them falling slowly. So we need to adjust our speed. So let's have a speed of 350 and a speed randomness of 150. Let's give them a little bit of spin. First of all, let's do some angle randomness. So 360 for the angle randomness and 45 for the spin, 45 for the spin randomness. And now that's looking a little bit better. You can see how the build-up of the snow is actually working even without anything else. So just that little edge is actually working quite well. And then they all die away. So that's pretty good. I'm going to call this main snow. I'm going to duplicate it, right-click duplicate, call this big snow. I just want some really large flakes, but I don't want too many of them. So I'm going to come to that keyframe there at 7 seconds, set that up to, I think, 10. Let's come down to the scale, have a scale of 40, scale randomness of 10. I think it's still going to be fine for this. So we just have these sort of big flakes like that. Just helps to give us a little bit of depth. I mean, obviously, the thing with snow is the more layers of these you build up, the better. Actually, I might just increase the scale randomness on this. If you can build up layers, it looks really nice. So what I'm actually also going to do is I'm going to copy that main snow, right-click copy, and I'm going to come down into my background group, paste it just above the rocks like that. So what I want is some background snow, so call that background snow like that. And this we can have as really quite small. So I'm going to go for a scale of 4, scale randomness of 1. And again, if we come to our 7 seconds keyframe there, I'm going to set this way up, I think, so like 1,000. So we get that sort of snow in the background effect. As I say, the more layers of that you could do, the better. You'd probably find that you'd want to actually render these out as separate passes rather than trying to run everything live. But let me just turn back on our landing snow and see if we can actually get this to play. That's playing, yeah, getting 24 frames a second there, but admittedly I've turned off a few of those layers, so it's helping me a bit. What else do I want to do? I want to do something with this background here, with these rocks, so that to give the feeling of them actually also being hit with the snow as well. So with that rocks layer selected, I'm going to come to filters, color, hue, saturation. So I'm going to come to 6 seconds on the timeline. I'm going to hit a keyframe for the value. I'm going to come forward to 10 seconds on the timeline, and I'm going to set that up to about 1.6, I think. And you can see how that It looks as though fresh snow has fallen on that. Very, very cheap trick really there. And I'm also just going to duplicate that layer, right-click, duplicate. I'm going to take off that hue saturation. I'm going to set its blend mode to add. What that does is it adds an extra layer of kind of oomph to it. And I'm going to add filters, stylize, min-max, switch to maximum, have a radius of 4. And you'll see this is kind of just giving us a bit of a sort of bloom on the snow. So sort of extra snow has actually fallen. And I'm just going to just add on top of that an unsharp mask, just to sharpen it up just a little bit. Now, what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to animate its opacity. So I'm going to come to 2 seconds on the timeline and set its opacity to 0, set a keyframe, come forward to 10 seconds on the timeline, and we'll just set that opacity there to 50. We don't want it full strength, but it'll just give us a little bit of extra something. So let's see how that works on the run. And you can see as everything is building up, we're getting that sort of extra layer of snow in the background without too much effort. So there's one thing I noticed I messed up on as I was building this for you just now, and that's I've got the layers of my elements here the wrong way round. And actually I want those 2 icy edges to be above the dark extrude. So if I move them above, you'll see the difference that makes. We now got the iciness on the inside of these cracks, and that's a lot more interesting. Now, I do need to make a little bit of an adjustment to that. I'm going to turn off the top one as I do that and select the bottom one. I'm going to come to Filters, Color, Levels. You'll notice it's a little bit sort of grey there. And we just want to come to Levels Alpha and just grab that black there and adjust it a bit. And you can see we can just bring back more of the black. We don't want to go too far. We want to leave a little bit of sort of lightening up in there. So somewhere like that will do. And let's turn the other one on. And again, we want to do the same thing. Levels, switch to alpha, and just adjust the black so we get a little bit more sort of darkness in the crevices like that. So that's looking a lot better. But I think that effect kind of gives you, makes it a lot more interesting because it looks like, the winter's arrived and the snow has finally landed in all those gaps. So there you go. That's more or less it. I just want to make a point about if you wanted to add a camera to this, I'd be very careful how you did it. Obviously, it would be quite nice to have a push in, but what we need to do is to actually set the individual groups to 3D separately. And in actual fact, let's put this edge group inside the settling flakes group. And so we don't want the overall effect to have gone 3D. So obviously we do want all of these actual groups to be 3D, but if we just added a camera, they would become 3D inside there. So it's kept everything 2D inside, which is exactly what we want. So now we could add a camera and everything is fine. So we can take our background and we can push it back, say 2000 pixels on Z, and then just scale it back up again. We can take our 2 rocky elements. Let's increase their scale to 125. And again, we can push them back on Z as far as we need to, so around about there. And now if we move our camera, we'll get a bit of parallax. So let's add a little bit of camera dolly, and let's set a distance of, say, 400. It's probably too much, but it gives you an idea. So now we're getting kind of parallax on the camera, differential movement between the foreground and the background. So that's the way I would do it. Make sure you set the groups manually to 3D. Don't let the camera do it when it adds, because it'll set all the internal groups to 3D, and that'll really mess things up. So I hope that's been useful. Thanks very much indeed for watching. See you again another time.